Well, hello there, and a very good afternoon to you, and welcome once again to our question and answer sessions here with Professor Michael Clarke. Pleased to say, we're on time this week for once. I wasn't late, neither were you, so we're good. 1 o'clock sharp start. We appreciate you joining us, as always, and submitting your questions. We've had loads of questions, both on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and on the situation in the Middle East. You may well have noticed over the past few hours that situation has changed slightly. We've had Donald Trump making comments from the NATO summit in Ankara. Why don't you just give us a sort of a brief as to where you think we are with the Iran situation at this point, Michael?
Well, last 24 hours has been a big uptick in strikes on both sides. So the Iranians struck some tankers in the Gulf. The Americans responded with a series of quite big strikes, about 60 different targets hit on the Iranian coast, in Bandar Abbas and even Bushehr, where there was some explosions, which on the nuclear,
Which is where the nuclear
not
facility is.
where the nuclear facility is, but also Sirik and Qeshm Island. And then the Iranians responded by attacking American bases in Kuwait and in Bahrain, which is where the Fifth Fleet is. That's where we are for now. And then, after I commented on that on the breakfast program, I was just on my way over here to Osterley, and I heard that Donald Trump had said, "Oh, well, the MOU is now, the ceasefire is dead, and that the Iranians are scum."
Scum, we're not going to
That
deal
was
with
the
them.
phrase
Yeah.
he used. Whether he means that, I rather doubt, and I doubt that the MOU really is dead. But he's very angry, and he's now saying all bets are off. I don't think that's true, but that's where we are as of lunchtime now.
Extraordinary, isn't it? Okay, let's get into these questions then. I've got a couple that I want to put to you about sort of how the Americans at this point are facilitating being able to keep responding. First question here comes from D, and I'll do Kieran's in a moment. But D asks, do you think Trump is intentionally escalating the war during the summit as a test of whether NATO will get involved? I mean, he has already commented, hasn't he? I think it was yesterday, talking about his sort of displeasure that his NATO allies didn't help him out with his war in Iran.
No, I mean, certainly he was on his way to NATO to berate them over what he says is their lack of support for the Iran war. And the Americans are talking about, there will be consequences to the NATO allies. And he made a statement in his first meeting with Erdogan, who's hosting the NATO summit in Ankara. He said, I may pull all the troops out of Europe, all 80,000 of them. Whether he means it or not, whether he's thought it through, we don't know. But the Americans are talking about troop drawdowns, and we could talk about that later on, how important that is or isn't. But he certainly came with Iran on his mind and punishment on his mind as far as the NATO allies were concerned. The idea, did the Americans respond to this provocation by the Iranians specifically to give him ammunition for that argument in Ankara? I doubt it, to be honest.
Could it have been that the Iranians provoked it, knowing that he was going to be in at NATO?
I don't think they were thinking that far ahead, to be
that's
honest.
the
I
imperial-
think
that's
the
the
Iranians,
morning, aren't they?
No, they're quite subtle, but they overplay their hand.
Right.
And I think this was all about, when you look at the tankers that they attacked, the three ships, they were all on the Omani route. The point the Iranians keep making is that the Strait of Hormuz is open as long as you use our route.
Use our bit.
The northern route
Give us
around
a little
Larak
fee.
Island,
Yeah.
the toll booth, even though it's not exacting any tolls at the moment, though we've talked about that a few times. I think the Iranians attacked these ships for local reasons in order to show that this Omani route should not be used because it's not safe, and they can make it unsafe by attacking ships. And it happens to have come at this moment. But, I mean, the decision on targets to go for will have been taken by CENTCOM, Central Command, and that's Brad Cooper, who's CENTCOM commander. Obviously, he'll have talked to the White House and the Pentagon about it. And they probably said, look, you've got to respond strongly to this.
Yeah.
We can't have the Iranians just attacking ships at random on the Omani route. So we need a strong response, indicate that we're serious, that we're not passive in the face of these sort of provocations. And the boss doesn't mind. I mean, the boss will take all that into account when he goes to the Ankara summit. So I think it was that way round, not the other way. The conspiracy way round is that the Americans somehow created it in order to emphasize his point. But Trump doesn't need any extra provocation to beat up on his allies. No. And he was coming to Ankara to beat them up anyway. And I don't think he needed this to make it any worse.
No. So the US obviously still have a sizable force in the region. It's now a number of weeks, months.
They've still got two carrier battle groups
carriers there,
and
right?
they've got the Marine Expeditionary Unit around the Tripoli, and they've got a lot of. They've still got. I was doing a count last week. I think they've still got 31 warships in the region. including it was either 17 or 18 destroyers, and then the 2 carriers, the assault ships, and all the other bits and pieces that they need.
And can they be refitted, restocked, maintained within the region? They don't have to withdraw entirely, so they can stay there essentially for as...
They can, to a degree, but the crews, it's difficult to rotate a whole crew, certainly from a carrier, because those carriers, I mean, a Lincoln, I mean, the crew is something like 6,000. With an air wing on board. I mean, it's a lot of people. And so you can't just kind of recrew it in place. Normally the carrier comes out, but the Americans have got, remember, they've got 11 carrier battle groups. So what they'll do is replace one for another. And at any time, if you look around the world at their deployments, they've usually got about 4 carrier battle groups out. I think at the moment, they've got 5 or 6 on operations somewhere. They could increase that if they needed to. They can increase the tempo. So they just replace one carrier battle group for another.
So for this kind of retaliatory strikes, they've got enough material in the region to do it easily.
No question. The Americans have the facility. They could go back to the sort of strikes they were carrying out up to the ceasefire in April. I don't think they will. And I don't think politically they can, because we're that much nearer the midterm elections in November. The economic damage from doing that will be all the greater. Inflation will go up. The oil price will shoot up if that happens. I think there's lots of reasons why the Americans won't do it. But militarily, could they? Yes, of course they could.
Interesting. Question here from Kieran. I might have an answer to this, but I'll let you do it, Michael. Kieran asks, as ridiculous as it may sound, is there any connection between this resumption of hostilities and the US being knocked out of the World Cup? Did Trump simply get distracted, stop being distracted by the tournament and go back to war? I mean,
4-1. 4-1 to
poor
Belgium.
old USA.
Well, go on.
Well, I mean,
you've got the answer.
I have very strong opinions about Donald Trump's intervention in the World Cup in the past week or so. I think that decision to have that conversation with Infantino and tell us so openly that he was doing it kind of compromises all of us who want to watch this tournament. All of us now watching this tournament have that in the back of our heads, that we are watching a tournament that feels in many ways like there is a fix in some parts of it, and that is really, really depressing to football fans who want to watch.
It's depressing to sport.
100%.
A couple of interesting things on this. I mean, people who don't take any interest in politics and don't really take much interest in what's happening in the States, but everybody knows who Donald Trump is. This is the thing that will stick in the memory of people who are otherwise not very interested, that Donald Trump interfered in the World Cup. And it's a footnote in history.
It is.
It's a small footnote, but it will stick on his reputation with people who are otherwise unpolitical.
It's just extraordinary.
I know.
You know?
And I mean, and Gianni Infantino.
Don't get me started.
I've got to be careful here about
we have to be
getting caught for getting
they're litigious people. Let's be really careful.
But do you remember when the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace?
Of course.
Do you remember the famous meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, wasn't it? After the Gaza peace accords were signed in January. And everyone was turning up there. There was Eddie Rama from Albania, and there were all the great dictators. And suddenly at the end, there was Infantino.
I was thinking, why?
What's he doing there?
On earth is the head of FIFA
What's Infantino
there?
doing? I thought, are they going for a kick around afterwards?
No.
I mean, were they going to have a little five-a-side tournament between them? What was he doing there?
It's a stage in their relationship, wasn't it?
And what he has done, he's put FIFA into the middle of the political arena. Now, some would say, well, that's a good idea. And others would say that's completely illegitimate because sport has got to be somehow separated from politics as far as possible. It never is possible, incidentally. I mean, even the ancient Greek Olympics were extremely political.
Absolutely.
You can never get rid of that link. But Infantino has actually taken pleasure in throwing FIFA into the middle of the MAGA Republican movement.
Yeah.
And that, all I can say is I don't think it will end happily.
No, it won't. And talking about people staying in power for a long time, Infantino is due for election again pretty soon. There's every chance he will win again despite this and despite the approbation from many people around the world, which will mean that then his term surpasses the allowed term limit for the head of FIFA. Not the first time the head of FIFA has done that. Infantino will be following.
Surprise.
Right? I know. So in answer to your question, Kieran, I think I can say no, but Michael, no connection.
I think it was just one of those little pieces of natural justice.
Yeah.
4-1.
Yeah, exactly.
Natural justice.
Well, I never supported Belgium quite so much as I did in that particular game. All right, let's move back to the serious part of this conversation, Michael. Question here from Brad. Is the US response to Iran's violation of the ceasefire proportional, or is he manipulating markets again? The oil price has spiked, hasn't it?
Yeah, but not so far. I mean, it has spiked, but not up, it's not up as much as it has been. I mean, the top of the oil price, back to our favourite subject, but the top of the scale has been, I think it's $126 was the highest it reached. And we're now talking about 74.
I'm going to get it. Hold on a sec. It's running at 78.6. And WTI is 75.
74.
The Brent
Okay,
crude
yeah.
at 78.
So it's $2 or $3 up from yesterday. So it is going up, but it's not catastrophically going up because I think the view of the market is that the ceasefire is essentially likely to hold, even if it's declared over. The US and Iran are probably not going back to all-out operations for the reasons that we can talk about. And therefore, there's a lot of surplus oil on the market. And in general, over the next couple of years, subject to world crises, you would expect the price of oil to keep on drifting downwards. The structure of the market at the moment is that there's quite a lot of supply, that demand is not taking off very strongly for all sorts of other reasons. So there's an excess of supply over demand for the next 2 or 3 years. But that will change at some point. So the market isn't reacting, it isn't going berserk on this news. Did the US overreact? Well, they reacted in a very specific way. So what they said at CENTCOM is that we're not going to bomb, as it were, contestable areas of Iran. We're going to bomb facilities that are being used to target ships in the Strait of Hormuz. So air defense radars, air-based facilities, missile launching facilities where they can find them, and they will claim that, I mean, I've no reason to disbelieve them, that they identified certain launch facilities, because the Iranians keep these, under wraps in caves and caverns,
why it was so difficult
and then bring them out and launch them.
Protect them.
And even then, they've got to be pretty quick, because the Americans can get onto them very, very fast. So I think the response was meant to be strong. It was meant to shock the Iranians into believing that the US could go much higher, and it was meant to be, if you like, proportionate, but on the high side of proportionate. I think that's what they intended. That's my interpretation. And because they don't want to go all out, but they want to re-establish the idea that if the Iranians play games in the Strait of Hormuz, attacking ships, there will be consequences. And that every time they do it, they'll lose more stuff. They'll lose more facilities, more weapons themselves, more ability to conduct their operations.
And the strikes have been backed by Mark Rutte, head of NATO.
Yes, and they had to be, really. I mean, they're sitting there with the American delegation, President Trump. They weren't going to say we disagree with these strikes. They couldn't do that. So they've backed them on the assumption that yes, if the Iranians play games, then there ought to be consequences. That's not a hard position for them, not a difficult position for them to take. What they think privately, we don't really know, but officially, I think it's reasonable that they would say that.
Yeah. Before we move on to our next question, Michael, a thought from you about the oil price. When it all began, there was talk of it going to $200 a barrel.
Yeah.
It never quite got there. And I don't know, I know you're a reader of The Economist. I don't know if you've seen it this week or last week, where they had an article saying that they were wrong about it. The markets kind of worked their way. And I find it fascinating. You block off an area where 20% of the world's natural resources come through. Everyone expects it to skyrocket, but the market somehow was able to maintain and keep prices manageable.
The market's very flexible. And that goes back to the oil crisis, the original oil crisis, which you won't remember, but I do, of 1973, 74, when oil prices they quintupled, went up 5 times. In about 3 or 4 months. And I remember we saw it at the pumps immediately. I remember there used to be panorama programs saying, what if petrol was £1 a gallon? What if it was £2 a gallon? People said, no, £2 a gallon. There we are. And the price went up a long way. And OPEC then, that just formed itself, OPEC tried to cut off the Netherlands, because they said because of Netherlands' support for Israel, Dutch support for Israel, we are completely cutting off the Netherlands from any oil.
Is it?
That's what they
Shell.
said.
Right.
And it was the wicked old oil companies that shared it out and kept the Netherlands going, because the market turned out to be extremely flexible. They got through the worst crisis at the time, and when the second oil crisis occurred in 79, the market was pretty well set for it. And since then, of course, the market's diversified. OPEC is far less powerful now than it was then, because there are now more oil producers around the world. And it's a very sophisticated market. So I'm not surprised. I mean, this $200 mark this time round was a kind of a rhetorical mark. I remember the Iranians saying, enjoy your $100 barrel oil
Yeah.
because it's going to be 200 quite soon. And they taunted the Americans with that. I mean, I always thought that was going too far anyway, but I think 126 was the highest it got.
Right.
It quickly drifted down to 100. There's a sort of psychology around 100.
Yeah, okay.
You know, plus or minus 100. And here we are, we're back to 75. I wouldn't be surprised if this crisis continues at this level of tit-for-tat attacks, that it might then drift up towards 80, 90, maybe get back toward 100. But you kind of get a sense that its natural level is still upwards of 60 to 80,
Right.
and it will drift below 60 at some point when some sort of normality is restored.
Are we still waiting on sort of like a latency of like the real impacts of this sort of stuff? Are we, because there was always that fear, wasn't there? Because there've been so much shipping that's been restricted and in and out, there is going to be a latent impact on us into the autumn.
There is, not so much in the oil price, because oil is always priced about 60 days the market ahead. You know, everyone's buying oil in 60 days' time, and so they're anticipating what they think it will be, so they buy it now at whatever they think, and that actually has the effects it has on the price. But in other respects, in food inflation, that's still baked in, so that's still got to keep on going up, whatever happens. And the same with fertilizer shortages and food production shortages, because of fertilizer shortages, means that deep into next year, we'll still be feeling the effects of this crisis. So a lot of it is latent, not so much the price itself, but the knock-on effects of that price on other things, yeah.
Okay, let's move on to a question here from Eleanor. Back to Mark Rutte and what he had to say. And as you rightly point out, he said it in public because he's there with Trump, but what he actually feels, we perhaps don't know. Eleanor asks, Trump treats NATO members with disrespect, and yet Mark Rutte is so obsequious. Is it time for other NATO members to show a bit of backbone?
Well, in a way, you know, they did over the Greenland issue back in the Davos summit, and then immediately after Davos. The Americans never really understood, I think, not the MAGA Republicans anyway, they haven't understood the damage that the Greenland issue did.
He mentioned it again yesterday, didn't he?
Yeah, he's come on to Greenland. He's on to Greenland again because he's so angry about everything. And so, so Greenland's back on the agenda. And that issue really damaged relationships because the Europeans said, look, this we can't live with this. Yeah. And the EU stood up to America on tariffs, and NATO, European NATO, stood up to him on Greenland. And the Americans then backed off. He came to the summit after Davos and immediately said, oh, well, I didn't really mean it about Greenland. We can do it in other ways. So there has been quite a lot of backbone. And in a way, the Europeans have learned that if you agree with Trump, he just sort of wipes the floor with you anyway. So like the sort of man he is, he respects people who stand up to him, even though he abuses them and insults them. He sort of respects the fact that they've stood up to him. So they do that. Now, Mark Rutte's position is different, and he's the man who has to keep the show on the road for NATO. And even if that show is getting very sort of creaky, he has to keep it going. He's like the ringmaster. He's got to be optimistic. Whether he overdoes it or not is a matter for judgment, but he's got to be positive. And his job is to try to be the interlocutor between those who are tougher, like, say, Macron, French President Macron. He's a tough guy on America, and he wants to be tough with Trump. And Rutte's job is to say, OK, I understand Macron's position, and this is the way I will explain it to Donald Trump, who is my friend, and so on. So he's a translator of the backbone that is there in the Europeans and this American president who is so volatile. So I don't blame Mark Rutte. I mean, he might have got it wrong when he called him daddy and things like that. But his job is to be the translator between the European members of NATO and this particular American president.
I mean, to Eleanor's point, though, what damage does that do to, the man himself, someone like Rutte, who has to behave in that way?
Rutte, you mean?
Yeah. And the institution, if it does, let's be honest about the facts. And America's the biggest, strongest, most mighty army within NATO. Without the Americans, NATO would be completely lost and kind of pointless. So you have to give Donald Trump into some respect what he wants. But I'm thinking about the way it kind of,
plays out.
Pulls at the fibers of it and just kind of makes it all seem a little less serious.
I think in a way, I mean, when Mark Rutte steps down from this role and writes his memoirs, I'm sure what he'd be writing is that people criticise me for all the things I said in public, but in private I said this to Donald. I said, Donald, you've got to realise this. Donald, you must realise that. And maybe that will be true.
Maybe.
I mean, very often somebody who says one thing in public and that gives them access to say more honestly in private. I mean, I'm sure that's what he would like to
He's no fool. He's a former Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
And do you know, as Prime Minister of the Netherlands, he was he was very good at keeping coalitions together that otherwise would never have sat around in the same room. 100%. So he does have skill in this respect. Whether he's overdoing it or not, I don't know. And it does stick in the craw, some of the things that he says on behalf of NATO. But I recognise what he has to do as Secretary General. I was with George Robertson yesterday. Yes, yesterday. It's been a long day. So yesterday afternoon, I was chairing George Robertson, who was he was the 10th NATO Secretary General. And I was thinking to myself then, I thought, I wonder if George would have said that. I wonder what he would have said. And I never got the chance to ask him because it was a big sort of big meeting.
No, he wouldn't have used language.
I don't think so. No. He's very comical about it, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Anyway,
I bet he has some good stories. I mean, and talking about memoirs, the Stoltenberg memoir is actually fascinating to sort of the way that he's had to go through, because he's gone through the entire period of seeing this kind of build-up and having to make sure the NATO stays together so it can defend.
He was a good Sec-Gen, very good Sec-Gen.
Yeah.
Rasmussen, before him, he was regarded as volatile.
Really?
I remember talking to people at NATO officials when he took over. They said,
it's a bit fighty.
The guy's peculiar. He said he's very good, but you never know what he's doing, and he takes sort of days off to go and do something completely different.
Really?
And so on. And others said, well, that's a good idea, isn't it? You shouldn't be so obsessed with it. But they couldn't work out Rasmussen at all.
The thing about being good at coalition politics, because Stoltenberg, obviously a Norwegian politician, has to work in that coalition as well.
That's
I guess Rasmussen in Denmark would have had to do that as well previously.
He would, yep.
So
and Rutte does,
Rutte does that,
all these are coalition fixers, and so that's why that's what makes them good in NATO. But again, you look at the Sec-Gens of NATO. The last few Sec-Gens are all from Northern Europe.
Yeah, interesting.
There is something about the North Europeans that makes them acceptable in this particular role of Sec-Gen of NATO is a really important job because you've got to help hold the transatlantic alliance together, and it's never been more difficult than it is now. Of course,
Absolutely.
not since 1949.
It was created.
The first Sec-Gen was Lord Ismay. Pug Ismay, as he was called, and he was very good. And
a politician by background. I don't know the name.
It was a soldier. But he was the first Sec-Gen. And Eisenhower became the SACEUR, the Supreme Commander, and Montgomery became the first leader of the military committee. DSACEUR, Deputy SACEUR. So Eisenhower and Montgomery were the two soldiers, and Ismay, who had been a soldier, was the Sec-Gen.
I'm back, sorry, just to plug something on Sky History. Tom Hanks' World War II series that I am watching and listening to over and over again for the past few months. So learning a lot more than I did about that period. And,
a lot more than you get from me, that's right.
Oh, I don't know about that, Michael. It's all everything that I'm learning from Mr. Hanks is kind of supplementing the stuff that you've already told me. It's all working together. Let's move on to our next question here from Wayne. Back to the Greenland issue. And Wayne asks, what's the difference between Trump and Putin when he's threatening to take Greenland off the Dames?
Yeah, Greenland. I mean, it's back on the agenda. And everyone's curious about that because there were negotiations going on along perfectly well. And it goes back to the fundamentals, which is that there is a security agreement between the United States and Denmark, which goes back to 1951. And that gives the Americans the ability to do all the things that they say they want to do in Greenland, do it under the agreement. There it is. I mean, whatever you say you now need, you can have under the 1951 agreement, which is a very, very favourable to the United States at the time. But Donald Trump doesn't want that. He's not interested in the detail. He wants the physical territory of Greenland to be added to the United States so that he can say, I, Donald Trump, have expanded American territory because he wants to go down as one of the great presidents. I mean, this is now the idea that he thinks that, there's half a dozen great presidents in the history of the Republic, and he wants to be another of them. A bit like Putin, I mean, given the questioner's view, I mean, Putin wants to go down as, one of the great Russian leaders from Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, Stalin and Putin. That's how he sees himself. President Trump sees himself in the line that goes from, let's say, Washington maybe, but Jefferson, Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, three of whom are on the Mount Rushmore, and McKinley, Jackson, he really admires Andrew Jackson, McKinley he admires, and then Teddy Roosevelt in the 20th century, and he wants to be in that mould, one of those top six. I mean, he's not remotely going to make that, but in his own head, that's where he is. So the sense that he can add Greenland's territory, that makes him look like Teddy Roosevelt. who added to America's.
Was it Puerto Rico?
And McKinley and Roosevelt between them added with those kind of American imperialists in a way. And remember, 40% of U.S. territory was purchased, from Russia, from France, from Mexico, Spain, and so it's not unusual that they should, buy another chunk. And they've thought about Greenland in the past, but this is the point. What Donald Trump says he wants Greenland for is neither here nor there. He can have it all, but he can't have the territory as sovereign territory. And the reason that that there is a comparison here between Trump and Putin is that I'm sure the Russians were really happy to hear about the Greenland row, because that legitimizes imperialism. Yeah. The fact that big powers want to expand their territory. So that's exactly what Russia is trying to do, exactly what China is trying to do. They want to expand their territory. Remember, the Chinese, they expanded into Tibet. They expand on their western border. They expand into India. They aim to take over Taiwan. They want to expand into the South China Sea as their territory. And so expansionism, imperialism, is now the flavor of the month, or it's the trend of the 21st century. So hearing Donald Trump talk about expansionism in this rather crude way was very agreeable, I think, in Moscow and Beijing.
Can you put yourself in sort of Trump's position and see it from a position of strength? If there are these three blocks, if there's a Russian bloc, the Chinese bloc in Asia, and then the need for there to be a strong US bloc, is he setting up the United States? With all the resources that can be taken from Greenland, the protection of the high north, setting up the US for the next 50, 100 years.
I'm sure he thinks that. Stronger. Yeah, he does. No, it's exactly, Kamali, you're exactly right. That's exactly how he thinks. And of course, the world isn't going to be just divided into three blocks, and he knows that. But there will be three big powers in the world. I think Russia is not actually going to be one of them, but in his mind, I think he thinks it will be, because it's geographically important and resources. So he thinks that, look, there will be three of us in the world who will tend to make the political weather for everybody else, and that's kind of true. You add Modi to that; they're the big four. Yeah, okay. You've got to put India in that line.
The EU, Europe, in there anywhere?
Not enough. EU. It's what 22-23% of global GDP, which is not inconsiderable. But it used to be 40 or 50%. The EU and the United States together were like 60% of global GDP until quite recently. So the EU is a big player as a single market. But again, as a geopolitical actor, the EU is far less impressive than it is as an economic actor. It is an economic actor. Its tariffs really matter. Its regulations really matter. But as a geopolitical, big power, it isn't. It never tried to be, and it just isn't. So he thinks in those terms. And in a way, to his credit, in a sense, you think, look at what he's putting into AI. He perceives that America will be, America is already going to take 50 or 60% of the AI market, probably more. China will probably take 20%. And only 20%, and the Europeans might take 10 or 15%, the way it looks at the moment. And he sees, that strategic minerals, rare earths. He's got this sense that this is mercantilism, from minerals and oil and coal and all that stuff of the 19th century through to AI in the 21st century. We, the Americans, have got to get hold of as much of that as we can. And the Chinese say exactly the same. We've got to have strategic reserves of all of these things. And they've worked on that, of course, for the last 20-odd years. But what Trump has done is galvanizing America to take that view. And there is some logic in that. There is some logic in it. I don't think it's a good thing for the world in general, but if you're sitting in Washington with that sort of mentality, then it makes quite a lot of sense.
Yeah, you can see the geopolitical logic of it all.
In the future, the rest of us aren't going to be terribly grateful to Donald Trump, but I think future Americans may look back on the Trump administration and say, well, it was all crazy. It was a hell of a ride, but look at what we got out of it in terms of the underpinnings of our dominant economy. That's possible.
Might be the nicest thing you've ever said about Donald Trump, Professor Clarke.
Nicest thing I've said about him for years.
For years and years. Another question on this, just because I wanted you to talk about troop withdrawals potentially, and the question here from El Morton about Trump's threat. He said he could move all the soldiers out of Europe if he's not given Greenland. El Morton asks, is that viable long term?
It is. I'm not too bothered, to be honest, about troops as such, numbers moving out, combat troops and aircraft and planes, because they can always come back quite quickly if a future American president wants them to come back. I'd be more worried if they take out the logistics, if they close the bases, or reduce all the logistics backup. Then you can't bring a flight of aircraft back in if you haven't got the logistics for them sitting in Europe. But the other thing, the thing that the Europeans really worry about is America removing what are called the enablers. So satellite communication, intelligence, targeting, data fusion is really important. Air defense. I mean, the Europeans can do all these things, but at a much lesser level. And if those enablers were removed, then the Europeans would have to coordinate on them. Because what we have at the moment, the enablers are all integrated.
Right.
NATO is an integrated military, and the integration is run on it's kind of the Americans are the system integrators.
Yeah. Okay. They're like the central node.
Exactly. They are and their people run the system. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what the Americans wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted to do that. They didn't want the Europeans to have any of that 20 years ago because they wanted the Europeans to be dependent on them. Mm-hmm. Now they don't. And if that was all removed, the Europeans would have to coordinate on those things. Now, coordination is not the same as integration. And the important point about this is that in trying to make up for those things, we would make up for them at a lesser level. So, yeah, we could have data fusion, but it wouldn't work within a few seconds. It would work within hours. And we wouldn't have air defense, so we wouldn't be able to defend one big logistics hub. So we'd have to have lots of different logistics hubs to disperse any attack on them. So we couldn't bring stuff together quickly enough, as quickly as the Americans can. When you look at what that does to strategy, then on their own, without the American enablers, the Europeans would have to have a completely different strategy. So to put it crudely, at the moment, we're based on an American strategy is that if there were any war in Europe, we would win quickly, which we would with American backing. We'd win quickly. Without the Americans, we can't win quickly. We could avoid losing early.
Right.
And by time, so all of our troops, I think Richard Barron said this in front of the Defence Committee yesterday. Yeah, yesterday morning. He said, without the Americans, more and without more money, more of our troops will be killed and wounded while we buy time to build up behind it. And the war we would have to fight without the Americans will be immensely more expensive than the war we could fight with the Americans. Because if we fight a war and we win quickly, with this kind of overwhelming force, which it is with the Americans, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. That's unpleasant, but it's one thing. But fighting a war where we buy time with the lives of our soldiers in order then to build up behind it to try to prevail, that's a long and expensive and much more bloody war.
Absolutely.
And that's where we would be without American enablers.
So has he found a real point of leverage here then with this kind of rhetoric?
Well, if President Trump understands any of what I've just said, I mean, they understand it in the Pentagon. They certainly understand it in Brussels and in SHAPE, which is the Supreme Headquarters. They understand that very, very well. Would he do it? I don't know. I mean, the Pentagon absolutely doesn't want to do that. They want to leave the enablers where they are.
Right.
I mean, I can promise you the vast majority of the American military are happy with what they were doing, and they don't like where they're being pointed by Pete Hegseth and by President Trump. And so they're slow rolling all of the orders that they're getting, which is one reason why Hegseth is getting rid of so many officers. Because every time he thinks they're not loyal, he just gets rid of them for doesn't give them a reason.
There's a huge number of people that have been sacked.
Yeah, exactly. They're hollowing out their own military. But we'll see. I mean, if it were to happen, then the whole strategy of European defence for the rest of us would change effectively overnight. I don't think it will happen, actually, if I had to guess.
He's doing it at this point, rhetorically at least, out of a fit of pique that he's not being given Greenland. Can he make an economic argument? Does it cost the Americans loads of money to have these things stationed here? Is there like a security element? Can he say we need to move it all to Asia?
The economic argument is it's more expensive to station them in the US.
Right.
So it is cheaper. I mean, quite apart from building more facilities, even if you didn't build more facilities in the US, it is cheaper to employ service personnel and their families in Germany than it would be in Fort Hood or in Florida or in New Mexico, wherever it might be. Much more expensive to have them back in the US. So there's no economic argument as such. And 80,000 troops, I mean, it sounds like a lot, but I mean, they'd all fit into Wembley and still leave quite a lot of room for somebody else.
Bigger than the British Army at the moment, 80,000.
British Army, 70,000. The Russians always say that. When they have in the Russian media, they say the British Army could fit inside Wembley and there'd still be room for a couple of French brigades.
Hilarious.
And they use Wembley as the measure. everyone knows Wembley. It's an
80,000.
international symbol. And so Wembley represents, what is it, 100,000?
No, it's 80,000. I mean, I think it used to be 100,000 back in the day, but now the new Wembley.
Is it, I don't know what the new Wembley
is. About 79, 80,000.
Is that what it is? Okay. Well, the British, well, that's right.
Check.
British Army is 70,000. 2 French brigades, that's 2 lots of 5,000. So there you are, 80,000. Yeah.
Right. Hilarious.
I didn't, 80,000?
I think so.
I thought it was more.
It used to be 100,000 back in the day, but when they knocked down the old Wembley, used to have the dog track around the outside and built the new one. I'm almost certain it's 80,000, but I'm going to double check as I ask you the next question.
Everyone out there will know.
I know they'll know. They'll be correcting me. Don't like being wrong for long, but I'll be right eventually.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to some questions here around Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Zelensky again talking about the joining NATO. So this question here from Mark, Portugal. Is Zelensky being a little reckless pushing again for NATO membership? He's never going to achieve it and will face a strong response from Putin. I mean, is he never going to achieve it? What do you think?
Well, maybe not never. I mean, I used to say, before the full-scale invasion, 2022, I used to always to say that the chances of Georgia and Ukraine coming into NATO is remote in the extreme because it's so difficult and because it would be so difficult for Russia to live with. And when in 2008, NATO was pushed by the United States to talk about eventual membership for Ukraine and Georgia, I remember saying on the Today program, I think, I said this is very, very eventual because it's just not practical. 2022 changed everything because suddenly, if Ukraine is to be stabilized against Russian aggression, then the only way of doing that is with the strength of NATO behind it. Now, whether that means full membership or something close to full membership, we don't know. But that's the territory we're in now. I mean, politically, Ukraine isn't going to come into NATO anytime soon because the US completely opposes it. And other members of NATO say this is a step too far. Ukraine isn't ready for it and it would be too dangerous for NATO. It would get us into a war with Russia more easily. I understand those issues. And so our arguments about, well, they could come in as an associate member, everything except the Article 5 guarantee. Yep. And to be honest, the Article 5 guarantee looks as if it's fading away anyhow. So associate membership may turn out to be not as bad as you might imagine. But President Zelensky's got to say this. He's got to say, look, we belong inside NATO. We're a Western country. We're reforming ourselves for EU membership, for NATO membership. We're working hard. We are defending the rest of Europe at the moment with our lives. We're not. This is not our war we're fighting. We're fighting your war. Our war is your war.
But sorry, at this point of the war, and with Russia behaving as it is, what would it give the Ukrainians if they were a part of NATO now? Because with Donald Trump in the White House, there's very little chance that the Americans
would
come.
Yeah. It can't happen.
Well, no,
now.
but would even come to their aid if they were in NATO. If suddenly
they wouldn't.
Were given NATO membership and Article 5 was invoked, would the Americans come to their aid?
Almost certainly not. Almost certainly not. Nor in the case of, say, Estonia or Latvia, Lithuania or Poland. The general view is, private view, they won't say this in public, is that if the Europeans find themselves in some sort of shooting incident with the Russians that invokes Article 5, the Americans won't go with it. They just won't react. They'll stay in their bases or whatever. And that's where we are now, probably. So no, you're right. If Ukraine came into NATO now, it would be coming into an organization in which Article 5 is effectively broken. That's the view. Now, after Donald Trump, that may not still be the case, but it is for now. And we'll see if that becomes a long-term reality or it's just a short-term blip. But some sort of security guarantee to Ukraine is necessary. The Europeans have got to take on Ukraine's security at some point when there is a ceasefire of some sort with Russia. And there are different ways of thinking about that. But NATO membership is something Zelensky has to keep demanding. Yeah. He won't get it, but by demanding it, he might get 80% of it or 70% of it in some other way.
I'm still not entirely clear what it would give them at this point, Mike, because even if they did have some kind of associate membership, even if there was some kind of promise, I mean, what are the French? Is the UK? Are we going to send?
Well,
would we in that eventually send troops to?
I'll tell you what it could mean in practice is that the Ukrainians are quite good at making themselves into a physical porcupine. Okay. So they make themselves into a porcupine on the ground.
Yep.
And then to bolster that, we the West Europeans start stationing Western aircraft in Ukraine. And remember that Western air forces are much more powerful than the Russian air force. Now, the Russian air force would really fear that. And they take that seriously. So if we had air power stationed in Ukraine, plus arrangements to reinforce Ukraine with high ability battle groups in certain places. We couldn't defend the whole of the Ukrainian border. I mean, 1,000 miles of border on the line of contact at the moment with the Russians. But say the British and the French, the Netherlands, we've got these sort of strike groups, battalions, and up to a brigade who are rapid response strike brigades who could plug a gap, do a job.
Interesting.
Here or there. So you could envisage, I mean, all this is pretty progressive stuff, but you could envisage a Ukraine which is porcupine on the ground through its own efforts, backed up by air power, NATO air power, and NATO's ability to plug gaps as and when. Now, that would still be a pretty dangerous situation, but arguably less dangerous than a continuing war, which is coming in our direction. I mean, the longer it goes on, the more desperate Putin gets to double down on all his objectives, and so it's coming in our direction if it continues for very much longer.
Had a couple of questions come in on the YouTube live chats. Let's go to one of those. This one from Michael for Michael. It's not from Michael. Oh. From Bolt on AI from Australia.
Oh, right.
Hello. Who asks, does Michael know how many drones the Ukrainians are making on a daily basis?
Oh, gosh. No, I don't.
Well, I've given it a Google, so you talk and I'll bring it up.
I mean, because the drones they're making are of all sorts of types. I mean, the ones we concentrate on are the 5-point ones. So it's the FP1 and the FP2, which are the most useful at the moment. And then there's the FP5, which is the famous Flamingo drone. And then the FP7, which is the new one, which is a ballistic missile. So 5-point are producing, as it were, some dozens a week, and they're aiming to ramp up to hundreds a week, partly with European help and with some produced in Europe. But there are lots of other drone makers in Ukraine, and some of them are just doing the always like the hobby drones, the handheld drones, and those particular ones, the FPV, the first-person view drones. If I had to guess, I bet you've got a figure there.
I've got the figure here. So
okay. You hold on to that figure. Let me guess.
You can't be above. Just like Price is Right. You've got to be as close as possible.
Okay, so all drones of all varieties. Yeah. A week. Are we saying every
We're saying
week?
daily.
Daily.
The question is daily. I've got daily here. Did you ask for daily? Or maybe you asked weekly?
Okay, all right. And let me try daily. Let me try.
Yeah, daily.
All production across the whole country, 1,000.
Google says in total, they're perhaps producing as many as 27,000 daily.
A day?
Per day. That's what it says. I mean,
right.
Google.
I was totally wrong then.
let's hold our belief in this in abeyance because it is Google. But they do break them down into 3 types of drones. The interceptor drones, which they say are producing about as many as 2,000 a day. The long-range strike drones, which are these flamingos, up to 200 of those per day. And then it's those cheap and cheerful tactical FPV reconnaissance drones.
Yeah.
The reporting here, and it's coming from Bloomberg, say they can make up to 17,000 of those per day. I mean, like
that's very good. Well, Bloomberg's figures are likely to be right then. Yeah.
Right? So they are producing
I was totally wrong.
huge number, Michael. I mean, for being right for all these years, I think you can be wrong on that number. But they are producing a huge number. And the point is that they are able, with their huge facility for producing this kind of material, able to,
they've really
maintain the
ramped it up.
defence.
Yeah, they have. And again, it's a physically big country, so they can produce in lots of different places that the Russians can't track. And they're getting a lot of production help from Poland, Germany, other European countries are helping. The Danes are helping with fuel for the Flamingo drones and so on. Flamingo missiles, as they are really.
Let's move on to another question here that's come in again from the live chat from Farukston. What's happening in Crimea? Is it a siege? It's kind of like an old medieval castle siege, starving them out. And can that really work in forcing the Russians to leave without them having to invade? Have they got it surrounded? Is it under siege now?
It's not totally surrounded, but it's certainly under pressure. So the Ukrainians said, and Fedorov said about 2 weeks ago now, he said, we're on a 40-day campaign. I don't know why he chose 40 days, but he said 40-day campaign in order to make Crimea an island.
Right.
And they're able to do a fair bit of that. So they've blocked off easy access on the R280 main highway from Rostov into Zankoy, which is the way into Crimea by road, the easiest way, road and rail. And then they've put a lot of pressure on the Kerch Strait and the Kerch Bridge is overloaded with stuff. If the Ukrainians could attack it again, I'm sure they would, if they could get a successful attack on it. And they certainly have forced Crimea. The governor of Crimea has declared a state of emergency. There is no petrol available for civilian use at all in Crimea.
None at all.
That's what he said. That's what he has said. The governor said it's only petrol or fuel is only available for military use. Mm-hmm. And the Sevastopol, the base of the Black Sea Fleet, is effectively empty, and they've got a few vessels there, but nothing important. They haven't left there anything that could be hit. And the air defence system of Crimea has more or less been reduced. The Ukrainians were working on this month after month. Mm-hmm. And I remember we said, you don't hit air defence facilities unless you intend to go in through the gaps that you created. Yeah. It took them a long time to create those gaps, and some of the air defence stuff has had to be moved out of Crimea to Moscow, because Moscow's also been hit. So
they haven't resupplied Crimea to make it more defensible?
They can't. Well, they haven't so far anyway. Okay. So Crimea is under distress, but is it completely under siege? Not yet. Mm-hmm. But the Ukrainians think that they can create a siege. And then the political effect of that, we'll have to see what it is. It's a big political effect. It's important to Putin. It was very popular in Russia. When Putin annexed it in 2014, he got lots of credit for that throughout Russian society, because the Russians thought, Crimea is ours anyway. It should be ours. It should always have been ours. And the idea that Crimea is effectively lost as a military base, and that the million or so, 800,000 to a million Russian speakers there, Russians there, mm-hmm. most of whom have come in since 2014, or many of whom have come in, if their lives become miserable and they are trying to leave, then Crimea, in a sense, is not besieged in the way an old castle would be besieged, because the Ukrainians want the Russians to move out.
Yes.
So they want to leave them a way of getting out and to leave Crimea as an unviable territory.
And I think it is worth pointing out that 40-day campaign that they've set themselves. They're early into it, day 13 of their 40-day campaign. Because obviously that's going to set us
it was about 2 weeks ago you said it,
set us a target, right? So in 40 days, from the 25th of June, when they set that target, we're going to be able to see where they've got to. And it's reported they've disabled 42% of their refining capacity on Crimea. So they are really attacking the energy sector, and as you say, if they can make it unviable for the people that live there, because it's quite a nice part of the world.
It's a lovely place to live, beautiful place. I mean, Mediterranean sort of climate. Hot in the summer, but beautiful beaches. It's a very popular place. Sochi. It's a place where
he's got a house there, hasn't he?
Exactly. I mean, it's a great resort, a place where a lot of the oligarchs used to have their hideouts and palaces. Yeah. Yalta's a nice place. I mean.
It's one to keep an eye on, and obviously with this Trumpishness of setting deadlines a couple of weeks in advance, we'll get a point where we can review it and see how they've gotten in 40 days. All right, question here from Proudly South African about the strikes on oil facilities. They ask, how successful is Ukraine's campaign of the strikes deep into Russia? Are they more symbolic than strategic?
No, they're quite strategic. They're much more than symbolic. Only yesterday, the Ukrainians attacked Omsk. And Omsk is the furthest inside Russia they've gone, which I think is 2,500 kilometers inside Russia. That's their furthest attack, and they got the refineries in Omsk. And what they're doing is they're attacking these refineries repeatedly, because one attack can cause damage, and it puts a lot of oil in the air and a lot of smoke, which makes the point. But that may only be one tank, and these refineries might have 8 or 10 tanks. So you look at the aerial photography, and they've really gone to town on the refineries around Moscow. And for them, that's really important, because they've created petrol queues in Moscow. And the symbolism of that is important. So, yes, it's symbolic, but their aim is absolutely strategic, which is to bring the pain of this war home to ordinary Russians, not by attacking their cities as such, not by a strategic bombardment of their capital in the way that the Russians are attacking Kyiv, but in attacking the refining capacity of Russia to starve them of petrol. And the Russians are now buying petrol from India, and that is not lost on the Russian population. We are, as an oil-rich country, are having to buy petrol because our refining capacity has been so badly hit. The Ukrainians are being really successful in that so far.
And trying to stop their ability to make war. It's actually, this harks back to the Second World War. Wasn't there a difference in opinion of bombing from the US and the UK? Yeah. The UK doing strategic area bombing, hitting cities, and the US saying that they would go during the daytime to hit the facilities of
That's
Nazi
right.
Germany to try and stop them being able to make war.
Plus the oil refineries in Romania that were attacked. I mean, the Americans always had this view that in the Second World War, if you could attack the Schweinfurt, the ball bearing factories, if you attack key elements in the production process, you could halt the production. Arthur Harris, who was in charge of Bomber Command, he said, look, you can attack all the oil refineries, but if the last drop of oil will still go to the Wehrmacht, it'll still go to the military. Which, and in a way, was true. He was wrong about that. In the event, although strategic bombing didn't work because they couldn't hit the targets accurately enough, they just couldn't. But in the end, the damage they did to oil production in Germany did have an effect. It did have an effect. And so, but Harris was right that you can't be accurate enough with these things. But the Americans were also right that if you affect the industrial infrastructure, eventually it does feed through to the front line.
And they were convinced that air power was going to be like a war-winning type.
Yeah, strategic bombing, that was
right.
it. That goes back to the 1930s, that the bomber will always get through. It's not true. I mean, and
have drones kind of taken some of that?
Yeah, they have. The idea that you can achieve with air power things you can't achieve with ground power. And it's still, the skepticism is still there. Strategic bombing can make a big contribution, but on its own, can you bring a war to an end by strategic bombing? Well, it's never been done so far.
No, look at Iran. I mean, the whole point is they had to, if they want to stop this, they'll have to put people on the ground.
That's
and they're
right.
not willing to
right.
do it.
Yeah, there's no. I mean, strategic bombing is no silver bullet. But from the beginning of the air power era in the 1920s, the idea that strategic bombing is a different way of warfare is not true. The only way in which it might be true would have been the strategic nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And even then, we don't know because the Japanese were on their knees before Hiroshima and Nagasaki were attacked. But that was the final nail in the coffin. They thought we just couldn't carry on. Whereas they were preparing to carry on. They were preparing a sort of last-ditch attempt at defence involving the whole population.
Yeah.
And the view in 1945 was the view that Harry Truman was fed. I mean, what they understood is that the invasion of the Japanese homeland would cost 1 million Allied troops plus multiple million Japanese. And so, the 60,000 deaths in Hiroshima, and I think it was 47,000 in Nagasaki, was regarded as a humanitarian price worth paying to avoid millions of deaths if the war had carried on in the way that it was going. But that's the one example you could cite of strategic bombing, but that was a unique example.
It's so unique, right? It's such a singular
moment. And only Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed because they only had 2 bombs. And they were different types. They didn't know if either of them would work.
First was Little Boy, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And Hiroshima was uranium, and Nagasaki was plutonium, and they weren't sure. And they wanted to convince the Japanese, which is why they launched them only 3 days apart. They wanted to convince the Japanese that this will go on. There'll be a 3rd and a 4th and the 5th.
Have they set the city for the next one, or was it just?
No, I don't think so. They Hiroshima, of course, wasn't the target that was chosen. It was the secondary target. The Enola Gay, the aircraft that took off, was due to go. I can't remember where it was due to go now, but anyway, it went to Hiroshima as the secondary target because there's too much cloud over the main target, and they convinced the Japanese by dropping 2 within 3 days that they had lots more bombs available, which they didn't.
Extraordinary. Little diversion there, but a worthy one, I think, Michael.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, because it's history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it rhymes.
Okay, final question here from Paul S. It's about Mariupol. What has happened to Mariupol? Will it become the shining symbol of Putin's Novorossiya, something we've talked about a lot, or will it forever remain a burnt-out ghost town?
Oh, no, it's not a burnt-out ghost town. The Russians have put a lot of stuff into it. It's a Potemkin village, if anything. Right? I mean, Potemkin village, right? Yeah. So Catherine the Great's first minister, Potemkin, Grigory Potemkin, in 1787, Crimea. Catherine's forces had conquered Crimea as part of the Novorossiya, her building of the Russian Empire, and she wanted to go on a tour of Crimea that she'd conquered. And Potemkin, the place was terrible. And Potemkin had all these villages built that were just like film sets of facades. And he had members of the Russian army dressed up as peasants.
Thank you, because I've always wondered, did they populate it with people?
Yeah, with the Russian army. They were all soldiers pretending to be peasants. And this was famous. This was the Potemkin village. And she was taken on a tour of these villages that were all frontages and nothing behind them. And that's how the idea of Potemkin village comes about. So Mariupol, it's not a Potemkin village in that sense, but it's a Potemkin in the sense that the Russians built a lot of cheap and nasty stuff quickly and populated it with Russian incomers, and the infrastructure is all shot.
Right.
So the electricity isn't good, the water isn't good. It's not a terribly happy place. Although if you were to send a drone over it, it would look like a reconstructed modernist city. But I mean, Mariupol was, it was the biggest steelworks in Europe, the Avastal steelworks. There were two big steelworks there. It was a big industrial city. I don't think it was a terribly pleasant city as these things go, but the people who lived there had a great sense of loyalty to it. And the Mariupol theatre, of course, were full of children when the Russians bombed it deliberately, even though it said children. They wrote children outside it, as a haven, and that attracted the bombs. So the Russians have rebuilt Mariupol into a sort of modern version of a Potemkin village, but it's not a very happy place.
No, as many places in occupied Ukraine remain. We've gone 55 minutes there, Michael, so let's call it a day, because I'm sure you've got work to do.
Yes,
and I've got to
give them a break. Go for a coffee, for heaven's sake.
It's always a pleasure, Michael. Good chat. I think diaries should align again for another one of these next week, Wednesday. Thank you all for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons, and we'll see you hopefully next week, Wednesday.